It's another episode of the Ultimate Intimacy Podcast. And today's guest, I mean, he's the man, the myth, the legend, Kevin Johnson. Oh, this is going to be an incredible podcast. Kevin's a good friend of Amy and I's, and we've been wanting to have him on a while. It was a couple of months ago, we were having a discussion with Kevin at our house, and he was talking about anxiety. And both Amy and I are like, man, we need to be recording this. So we're having Kevin back. We're having Kevin on the podcast to, share his wisdom and insight and talk about this important subject, anxiety in marriage and kind of the myths and how to help overcome it and things like that. So, Kevin, welcome to the podcast. We're excited to introduce you
Thank
to our
you.
audience.
Thank you. It's fun to be here with you guys. I don't know that I'm barely a man. I don't know about a myth or a legend, but good to
Well,
join
you're
you
you're
guys.
not a myth because you're for real. You're here on the podcast, but we'll go legend, and
He's a legend.
he's a
He's a
legend. That's
legend.
right.
I
So.
appreciate
Diving in.
Yeah, let's dive in. So, why don't you kick off the podcast with kind of a little bit about what we were getting into last time, talking about anxiety and,
I was talking personal issues last time.
well, that's okay. We're pretty personal
We
on the
only get
podcast,
personal.
as our audience knows. We'll get a little personal on
Well,
the
so our
podcast.
last podcast episode, we had a guest on, and he was talking all about perimenopause and menopause, how a lot of women are starting to really struggle with that. And we're not going
it.
to get in, well, just struggle like anxiety comes, it's starting to affect the marriage and the relationship and all the, all that stuff. We're not going to get into that today, but more focusing just on anxiety. And we're just hearing from tons of married couples how, when one spouse is really struggling with anxiety, it just kind of affects the communication. It affects the conflict resolution, the whole romantic connection, the just
Mhm.
everything, conversations.
And people are getting anxiety just thinking about anxiety.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's probably altogether too common. Yeah, I mean, anxiety, I think half the problem with it is that it's a very normal thing to experience anxiety. And but yet nobody likes it. Nobody's excited to experience anxiety. And so our immediate reaction to it is, how do I get rid of it? How do I overcome it? How do I control it? How do I shrink it? And if we're talking about it in relationships, it's, well, just stop feeling anxious and you just need to get over it. You need to let it go. And so the way that we end up thinking and talking about anxiety, um, the reason why we often end up feeling more anxious even as we talk and think about anxiety is because we're fighting with something that's essentially kind of a natural kind of occurring process. It's kind of like fighting yourself, getting old.
Mhm.
And you can fight it, but it doesn't change the fact that we're still going to get older. So we need to maybe think a little bit differently about how it is that we experience anxiety, um, how to engage in it, and how to kind of relate to it instead of necessarily trying to fight it all the time.
well, I love what you said that it's a natural thing because I think so many people, when they start feeling anxious, they immediately think, what's wrong with me? And then it causes maybe more anxiety, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I feeling this way? And one of the often responses to that is, well, I better go get some medication, right, to take care of this. And I love that you said, and we've listened to other podcasts as well, are like, anxiety is just a part of life. Like, as humans, we're going to have anxiety. There's going to be
Mhm.
things that are difficult or uncomfortable or
Mhm.
cause us anxiousness.
So,
Mhm.
can you explain to us the difference between having like severe anxiety and just being nervous? Because I think we hear all the time nowadays, like, you're anxious, you're anxiety, you have anxiety, you have anxiety, you need medication, you have anxiety. And we had such a great talk that night about it's normal to feel nervous and anxious about certain things. Like, where is that difference and where does it become extreme where it's like really starting to harm you and maybe medication is needed or some natural remedies or whatever?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So, first of all, like if you're imagine a scenario, if you were out in the middle of the woods and a bear came walking up behind you, then I would be far more concerned about the person who didn't experience any kind of fear reaction in that moment. Um, and we don't have to have prior experience with a bear to know that that's a dangerous situation. So, boom, automatically, that sympathetic nervous system kicks in. It's that fight or flight response, And that is both in context and proportion to the immediate stressor. And so context and proportion are, I think, important concepts to think about when we're talking about anxiety. So if you're pushing your cart through the grocery store and all of a sudden you feel like you're having this reaction, like a bear came walking up behind you, then that is both out of context and disproportionate to the immediate stressor. And so, here we can talk about like the normal experience of anxiety, but normal experience of anxiety in a normal situation is one thing. The experience of anxiety in a situation that is kind of out of context and disproportionate, that's a different experience altogether. So, but if you just notice, like, we're not likely going to impose any kind of judgment on the anxiety reaction if you're out in the middle of the woods and a bear comes walking up behind you. But notice the type of judgment that you will attach to yourself when you're experiencing the anxiety pushing your cart through the grocery store. And a quote that I use often is from a psychologist named Viktor Frankl. This guy is amazing. He was a Holocaust survivor, wrote an incredible book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he has one of my all-time favorite quotes. He said, "Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning." And so what we really take away from that is that, apply that to anything that we're experiencing. What he's really saying is that we're not suffering because of the thing that we experience. We suffer because of the relationship to it. So if you're pushing your cart through the grocery store and now we're saying like, gosh, dang it, why am I feeling such anxiety? And gosh, I can't make it go away. What's the matter with me? Other people aren't feeling anxious. Then everything that we're talking about there is really just reinforcing this negative judgment relating to that experience of anxiety. So we can talk about it being out of context and disproportion, but the judgment that comes in relationship to that situation ends up becoming really what fuels and kind of perpetuates that anxiety. And now reinforces this idea of I'm not in control and I can't make it go away. And, what's the matter with me because of it? And so, using that quote from Viktor Frankl, the intention that we really want to think about isn't learning how to necessarily remove anxiety, but learning how to change the meaning that we have about our relationship to anxiety.
Yeah, I love it. I love that conversation we had. That's where it got personal for me. I'm like, I freak myself out even more knowing that I'm going to be anxious at this time doing this thing, right? And I start overthinking and I'm like, then I make myself more anxious and more anxious. So it's hard. But once you realize like, okay, like this is normal. It's normal to feel this way. How do I cope with that? Like, what is the best way, do you think, for somebody to just cope when you start feeling like anxiety attack or whatever,
So that's a really good question. It's a really big question. Best way to cope, there's lots of ways of coping, and but ultimately, even before we think about coping, I kind of think of coping. I kind of equate it to like the idea of grip strength. If you're, trying to cross this canyon on a line and you're just having to like move hand over hand on that line, trying to get yourself across that cord, like coping is essentially that grip strength. And we're thinking like, okay, I hope I've got enough strength to be able to, get myself across that ravine. Coping is important. It's valuable, but if that's all that we're really relying on, then that becomes a real challenge. And so, again, if we can think about changing our relationship, our attitude towards the thing that we're experiencing, can we conceive of an idea where we can have a harness, right, that attaches us to it so that we're not afraid of falling? And now all of a sudden, I'm not having to just rely on that grip strength to be able to get me across. I'm still using that grip strength to help kind of propel me, but I've got some other mechanisms in place to be able to ensure that I can function there. And so I think the short answer to that big question is mindfulness. It has to start with mindfulness. If our relationship to anxiety is one that we're trying to battle, and there's in a sense a conflict with our anxiety, then we're more likely to suffer from it. So with mindfulness, can we learn how to invite a little bit more curiosity, a little bit more compassion into that experience? And as we learn how to do that, then we learn a little bit more about what it is to be a human being going through an essentially human experience.
Right.
So let's just take an example of like public speaking or something, right? I know we're talking about marriages and this can apply to so many different things, but let's just take an example of like public speaking. Someone's terrified to get up in front of public. How would they look at changing that mindset or becoming more, instead of beating themselves up like we're talking about, how could they change that mindset to help them in a situation like that, for example?
Well, so I mean that's a really good example of that, and that's a natural situation where I think anybody, it probably
maybe
feel
that's a
little bit
horrible
of
example. Let me
anxiety.
think of something else.
Your basic example.
Or
It's a
what are
pretty
your thoughts? Maybe another example that you have that people.
Well, I'm not saying that that example doesn't apply. I mean, I think everybody's probably going to experience some anxiety. Professional athletes. You talk about professional athletes, and they're going to say like, no, like I experience nervousness, before a big game, but learning how to embrace that is really kind of the difference. Instead of becoming paralyzed by it, letting that kind of be an energizing thing, and that speaks to, I think, an important part is that physiologically, there's not a lot of difference between the experience of anxiety and the experience of excitement. Like it's the same basic physiological symptoms: elevated heart rate, more rapid, shallow breathing. Like you're feeling it. You're like, oh yeah, I'm amped up, right? So the difference between those two experiences, why we have different names for those, for the emotional experience, largely again relates to that idea of judgment. Excitement is something that, oh, this is a good thing that's going to happen, whereas anxiety is like, oh, this is a terrible thing. I'm going to fall on my face. It's going to be miserable. And so again, this speaks to our relationship to the experience. It's not public speaking that's causing me to suffer. It's my attitude, my relationship to the idea of public speaking, or maybe more accurately, my fear of failure, my, these other kinds of things that are kind of conjunct to that. And so, can we really allow ourselves some time to kind of do a little bit of self-exploration? So in this regard, I recognize this isn't an immediate coping that's going to help you in that moment, but we can do some self-reflection. We can do a little bit of work with ourselves to get to a place of saying like, okay, I'm afraid of failing, right? And what's the worst thing that's going to happen to me if I get up there and bomb it, right? There's an amazing kind of an amazing truth, like just as it relates to that experience. But the show of vulnerability that we see in other people, we almost always look at courageous as being courageous.
Exactly.
This is Brene Brown's point. But the show of vulnerability within ourselves, we perceive that to be a weakness, right? And so being able to kind of again, maybe those are some factors that kind of contribute to the negative thoughts and associations in that relationship that we have to the fear of failure, or to this particular experience of public speaking, or that generalized experience of anxiety. So can we learn how to be just learning how to be curious, and in being curious, can we ask ourselves questions and getting to know ourselves and what we're experiencing? But ultimately, really, the whole reason why we do that is with the intention of learning how to be able to identify and separate judgment from how we see ourselves in this experience.
That's great.
I love how you just related what is our experience with, or what is our relationship with anxiety, because you're right, that's really all it is. And you're so right. Like the difference between getting excited about something or getting nervous about something is really how we're looking at it, right? Are we scared of failure?
Right.
Or are we excited to do something?
We're scared of being judgment from our peers. That was a lot of the things. Like I feel like the older I get, speaking on the public speaking thing, the easier. It's not getting easier, but I think I'm getting more aware that I don't really care as much what people think as I did maybe in my 20s or teen years. You know what I mean? So not that it like gets easier, but I think I have let that guard down and did some self-work. Like, why do I care so much? Oh, I don't care as much.
Right, exactly. And Amy, more to that point is like recognize, like, okay, like, hey, if I didn't perform according to my expectations, like I'm okay. Like
Who really
people, I
Yeah.
still, the people that love and care about me still love and care about
Right.
me. And I
Right.
actually probably will find, even in those moments, that there's more people who
Mhm.
appreciate the effort than who are turned off by whatever
Right.
perceived failing I might have had in that. So,
I think the more, I like that you said that, because the more mature that we get and understanding of people, the more like people get up and do really hard things that I see, I'm like, wow, you're really courageous. Like that is such a great talent, or I'm so happy that you tried. And yeah, I don't know. I love that. Yeah.
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 But this to me, again, just kind of speaks to the role of judgment. Instead of being defined by the experience of anxiety, we get to be defined by our opportunity to engage in that experience of anxiety, to put ourselves out there, and to be vulnerable and to learn from it, right? And I think this ties into one of the most important aspects and characteristics of what it is to be human. Like, we're wired to learn. Like, we're wired to heal. Like, I mean, you have a broken bone, and
Mhm.
you don't tell your bone to heal itself, right? Like, it
Right.
just immediately kicks in and starts
Yeah.
doing what it needs to do to heal. Our job is to try to help nurture and facilitate healing the way that healing can happen. But if we're going to say like, oh, this cast is really getting in my way and I can't do things, and I'm such an idiot for breaking my arm in the first place, and why do I got to be so weak? Like,
Mm.
none of that's going to help us heal any faster, but it can certainly at worst delay our healing process
Yeah.
if you're going to go
Right.
cut it off and try to use your arm anyways. Um, but allowing ourselves to be defined by our capacity to learn and to be defined by our capacity to heal. It's like we are constantly learning, growing, kind of moving forward. So let's not look backwards, defining ourselves by what we have known or what we have experienced. Can we say, well, I've never been here before. Can I be open to trying this out, and maybe um, be open to learning something from this experience that maybe only this experience can teach me?
Right.
That's great.
So let's jump into marriage with this whole talk on anxiety. What do you find is the hardest part about a spouse struggling with anxiety that's affecting the other spouse? Like, how can the other spouse recognize, okay, I see that you're struggling, trying to be more compassionate, more patient. What can they do? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, how is this affecting marriages in general?
Oh, well, yeah, it certainly does. And it's interesting, right? The closer we get to in those relationships, the more of an expectation there is for one another to be supportive,
Mm-hmm.
to be loving, patient, and accepting, right? And yet, when we really we to be honest, it's hard for us to see someone that we love and care about to struggle and suffer. And so our there's a number of different variables that kind of uh, work against the benefit of the relationship here. But when if my spouse, for example, is struggling with anxiety, and I'm thinking like, oh gosh, like, it's like with her anxiety, she's not able to help out with things around the house the way that would normally happen, right? And so if I feel like I'm taking on a bigger share of the responsibility, or I'm thinking like, gosh, like my heart is just broken for her, and I don't want her to have to struggle and suffer. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like there's different emotions that I may feel about her anxiety, but when my reactions are really about managing my emotions than they are with the intention of understanding and supporting her, then we're going to run into potential
Hmm.
conflict issues, right?
Right.
Um, I may say something like, just let it go, right? Just,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be strong. You got to pull yourself up, and you just got to
Not
push
that big a
through it.
deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not a big deal, right? Like, then everything that I've just said there is just invalidating of that experience of anxiety. And so instead of creating an opportunity for support, in improving intimacy, trust, and closeness, right now she's just saying, I don't want to talk to Kevin about my anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
without just being
Yeah.
made to feel like something's the matter with me
Right.
because I'm feeling anxious. Something's the matter with me because I can't just pull myself up and go and do all the things that I'm supposed to do. And so it's like, this is the same issue of judgment. Instead of that judgment being applied towards myself, the judgment is now kind of being externalized towards our partners. And And so the role of that judgment, again, just kind of becomes handicapping and crippling to our capacity to kind of learn and grow, and kind of work through that experience.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, like, what do you feel like the biggest symptoms or showings of anxiety are for spouses that don't really recognize it right off the bat? Because I feel like anxiety, especially in marriages, when one spouse has it and it kind of creeps into the marriage, maybe you haven't suffered and then all of a sudden it starts to hit you. Like, what are the big symptoms or stuff that you can look for with a spouse? Because anxiety, I feel like, can be really hidden, where I feel like sometimes depression, it's like, oh, they're really sad, they're not getting out of bed. I feel like there might be bigger signs, but maybe there are big signs with anxiety that maybe I just don't know. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Amy, that's a really good question. And this is where anxiety is really, so different than many other types of emotional experiences that we have. You know, there are kind of many different flavors to the experience of anxiety. Whereas sadness kind of feels like sadness,
Right.
and usually can kind of point to this thing made me sad. And there's some emotions that are just a little bit easier to kind of understand and comprehend that way. But anxiety, like we were talking about earlier, is my anxiety about fear of failure? Is my anxiety about not being able to be in control? Is it not feeling safe? Is it there can be lots of different points
Right.
of origin for that anxiety. But when it comes to anxiety, one thing that I think is helpful to kind of think about, just as a parallel, think about, or for example, there's certain things that we experience physiologically, like your heartbeat, right? Your heartbeat has kind of what we want to think about as a kind of a window, a window of tolerance, like an effective range of function, right? And so if your heart rate gets too high, like that's great if we're exercising, but we don't want our heart rate being too high for too
Right.
long. The only thing worse than having a heart rate that's racing too high too long is to have a heart rate that's too low, right?
Mhm.
But in using that same logic, blood sugars, if your blood sugars are too high, you're hyperglycemic. If it's too low, you're hypoglycemic. But here the experience, like the symptoms are different, right? When you're hyperglycemic, what are you experiencing physiologically versus when you're hypoglycemic?
Right.
And the same thing can kind of be true for ourselves with anxiety. So when we're thinking about kind of a more of an emotional window of tolerance, you can think of these terms of hyperaffectiveness versus hypoaffectiveness. And hyperaffectiveness, we may feel like you're just like I kind of describe it like holding on to like the frayed edge of a live wire, right? It's like, oh my gosh, this is just too much. It's overwhelming. It's intense. Whereas that idea of being hypoaffective, it's really more a type of numb, right? We're feeling numb. We're feeling disconnected. We use that term dissociation. And so anxiety can manifest itself in both, like the hyperaffectivity or the hypoaffectivity. So we need to kind of be mindful of like, okay, like what am I experiencing? Being able to identify the symptoms, just starting physiologically. This starts with some basic, kind of just self-awareness, recognizing what it is that we're experiencing physically, and then being able to recognize what's going on in my life around me. What are the circumstances? Have I been eating okay? Have I been sleeping all right? Are there medications that are kind of adversely affecting me?
Right.
Are there conflict issues? Are there work stresses? All these different things that we may be experiencing. There's not necessarily any like life experience that's going to cause me to be hyperaffective versus hypoaffective. Depending on where we're at and depending on what's going on, you may find that just like with blood sugars and heart rates, they can kind of go up and down. And so what we're trying to be mindful of, and maybe again, this relates to that idea of coping, we're just trying to learn how to be able to kind of get ourselves inside that window of tolerance. So coping, when I'm kind of hyper affective, can I maybe do some calming strategies? This may be some breathing exercises, some kind of grounding work. If I'm hypoaffective, then maybe what I want to think about is kind of doing some, well, yeah, like being able to kind of just, if the idea is like we're dissociating, then we're just trying to learn how to kind of reconnect. And so we really want to maybe think about and focus on like these different sensory experiences, right? Focusing on our breath, focusing on touch, smell, sight, sound, all of our different five senses, to again maybe just kind of help us bring us into that present moment. Again, trying to remove judgment from that present moment. But that's maybe just another kind of example of how those coping strategies can kind of help us in those moments.
Yeah.
Love it. So for wrapping it up, for couples that are maybe dealing with anxiety, it's really having an impact on their life, their relationship, mental state. What are just a couple things that you would recommend that they can do that can maybe,
as a couple?
Yeah, as a couple, yeah, that can help start managing and dealing with this anxiety a little bit better.
Okay. So if like I talk about the importance of mindfulness, kind of doing some self work, then learning how to be able to apply those principles within a relationship, just kind of building on that same idea. But when you if we're experiencing anxiety, and within ourselves we look at that anxiety and we say, I want to get rid of it, I don't want to experience this thing, then in a sense we're kind of we're creating a relationship of conflict with this anxiety. And so if I've never met a conflict that you could resolve with more conflict. We need to learn how to not fight against something that may be uncomfortable and distressing. Instead, how can we learn how to be more compassionate, more nurturing, more sensitive to what it is that we're experiencing that way? So if I'm experiencing anxiety, I remember watching this program, and it was on Netflix, called The Mind Explained. There's an episode on mindfulness, and in it there's this Buddhist monk, and he's talking about his experience with anxiety. And and I don't think anybody thinks as Buddhist monks as having terrible anxiety, but here's proof that everybody has anxiety, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And but he's saying, like, when I was little, with his little Tibetan accent, he's saying, look, when I experience anxiety, I don't meditate to get rid of my anxiety. I say to my anxiety, come sit next to me, come be my friend, let me get to know you. And I thought that was just such a powerful image, right? But when we think about the relationship to our partner and their experience of anxiety, can we do the same? Can we say, what can I do to help and support you? How can I be more nurturing and supportive and understanding, with the intention to invite empathy and love and support? It is fascinating to see the power of love and support and acceptance in helping to reduce anxiety. It is just 1,000 times more effective than criticism, control, and judgment.
Absolutely.
So if we're going to invite those ideas towards ourselves, we're wanting to just build on those same principles in our relationship with our partners.
Love that.
Love it.
Great advice. Great advice.
I could take that a whole step further, because he said something about, obviously you want to be friends, right? You have to invite that as a friend.
I love that.
That was great. And then you said something about, I can't remember because that was like 1 minute ago.
Perimenopause.
Which we talked about yesterday.
No, just your whole something about like you can't battle conflict with conflict. Just in marriage, just in conflict, right? Like if you want to work together at this or just anything in marriage, you're like, come sit by me. We're best friends. Let me listen to you. Let me try to understand you. It's great.
Yeah, I think that was a great analogy. Yeah, for sure. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast. If you're a couple that's dealing with anxiety or, these things in your relationship, and you like what Kevin had to say, reach out to us, email us at amy@ultimateintimacy.com. We can put you in touch with Kevin. And like I said, we could carry on this conversation for another hour and a half, which
we needed to get into libido and sex drives and all that stuff too. So we're going to have to do a part 2 eventually.
Exactly. But Kevin, thanks so much for coming on and just sharing this wisdom with our audience. And again, if you want to talk with Kevin, email us, amy@ultimateintimacy.com. We'll put him in touch with you. And we appreciate you coming on the podcast. And until next time, we hope all of you find ultimate intimacy in your relationship.